Cody here with Advanced Power Quality. Today we'll be finishing our series on self-healing teams. This will be part two, kind of go into more of the issues behind self-healing teams. And I also wanted to talk to our system planners out there on some items that they may not think of when designing self-healing teams. And again, possibly some mitigation techniques and what APQ can do for you in preventing issues with self-healing teams. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So again, in part one, we went over what a self-healing team is. In summary, it's 20 or 30 reclosers all talking to each other to coordinate the least amount of customers available. Now, why do utilities do this? Well, most investor-owned utilities, they have to present to committees, the PSC, such as that. Every year they have to present, what are their indices, their Cody, Mayfie, Sadie, such as that. And based off that, the utility is graded. So whenever the utility goes for a rate increase on the customer's bill, the PSC and committees will base them off of these indices. So currently, your sustained outages, one of your more higher weighted indices. Now, so what the trade-off is you will have less customers out for a sustained outage, but you will have more customers experiencing more momentary outages. Now, it all depends what state you're in. Some PSC guidelines, they define a sustained outage as 1 minute. Some define it as 5 minutes. So as long as the switchover period to return to nominal is under 1 minute for the team to restore power and quit its operations, quit the switching, then it's defined as a momentary outage. Now, as you know, a customer isn't going to define a 1 minute long outage as a momentary outage. Most customers won't say that. Just because it's going to trip off all your equipment. If you don't have any ride through, if you don't have any battery backup or anything, you're going to trip offline. And in addition, one thing I wanted to talk about is the damage behind that. Those operations, it's torture on devices. So as we went over in part one, your reclosers here. Now, one of the things that utilities hopefully are doing when designing these teams is installing more capacitor banks, reclosers, and such as that in between these segments for the energized part to be able to provide voltage stability. Now, what I mean by this is in our scenario in part one, we had a tree limb fall on the line. This would have normally knocked out the entire breaker. With our self-healing team and our recloser installed at this normally open point, it would have talked between all the reclosers and segmented the outage to have the least amount of customers out as possible. So only between the breaker and first recloser. Now, this would have meant red feed would have backfed up to here. Now, as all y'all know, voltage and voltage stability is essentially its impedance, its distance, such as that. Well, if you start adding to the line distance, you could run into low voltage out here if you're adding distance to how long that feeder is. This is why we have capacitor banks. This is why we have inline regulators. Now, let's say the utility thinks of that. They install these accordingly. Well, is their maintenance up to par with all these added equipment? As I went over earlier, capacitor banks are all fused per each cell. Each phase will have a capacitor bank cell, essentially. If that fuse is blown, let's say one fuse out of the three, essentially that cell is not operating correctly. It's not operating at all and can cause voltage imbalance. That can cause a lot of issues with industrial equipment. So with utilities adding all this equipment, they need to think, am I ramping up my maintenance personnel? Am I maintaining up my my funding for all that? My equipment is, I'm doubling the equipment on my system. Am I prepared for that? In addition, all this equipment is grounded and has protection, lightning arresters. Well, where they install those at is at the equipment. You're going to have lightning arresters and ground potential up there at the equipment. Am I doing this correctly? I'm inducing, a lot of possible issues for, animal mitigation, vegetation concerns. You have a lot of potential for phase to ground faults with all that added equipment. They need to think, do I need to study how I'm doing this if I'm going to do this exponentially more? A lot of utilities don't do that. But yeah, guys, that's one aspect I wanted to talk of in terms of all the added equipment. Are they all talking together? If you have smart meters, utilize that information. It is very useful. So as I talked earlier, I saw up to 56 seconds for a team to configure to nominal. That was just reclosers operating. After that's done, the load settles, capacitor banks, regulator banks, LTCs, they start switching on and off to get to the desired voltage. So that means that you could have a minute, possibly 2 minutes of incorrect voltage, improper voltage that could cause damage to your equipment. Now, in utilities tariffs, they say that they don't have to provide perfect power. They don't have to provide a perfect sine wave. They're allowed to go outside of tolerance limits every now and then. What are you as a customer doing to prevent that? Because it is your obligation to protect against transients and all these other utility events. So a lot of customers don't know that. They expect perfect power and they expect the first part of the sine wave. Now this year,